Welcome to the Moulding Health Show. Our goal is to leverage the wisdom and experience of our healthcare practitioners to set you on a path of self-discovery and healing. These insights, coupled with a multidisciplinary approach to each area of interest, should provide an invaluable resource to everyone looking for a better approach to health. In this episode, we speak to Marié Theart about autism from a speech therapist perspective. Marié Theart, welcome to the show. We're really glad to have you on.
Thank you very much, Oliver and Shaz. It's a privilege to be here.
Amazing to have you here.
Yeah, I agree. And Shaz has done an amazing job at getting some of our, guests on to the show. And I'm excited about this topic because we're talking about autism, and I can't speak about autism unless I think of like the Rain Man, the movie with Tom Cruise. But is that how it is? I mean, is that how you would, you can't profile patients, but is that something in, when we think autism, is that something that you would refer to?
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that is the misconception that a lot of people have. In the public eye, it's often how people think I want to say disorder, but with a gentle approach. How people often think it's going to play out when our kiddies with autism grow up, and it could, but unfortunately, that is the exception. That a child will grow up and be completely independent and have an occupation. That's definitely what, as a parent, you strive for. But sometimes the kids' difficulties are just too much, and the challenges are just too much to reach that point. But I want to say, if I've met one person with autism, I've met one person with autism. It's the most unpredictable, I don't want to say disability, but that I've come across, and they surprise us every single day with the things that they come up with. And that's why I love working with autism. You cannot place a person with autism in a box. You never know what they're going to come up with, and they can just enrich your life in different ways than Rain Man.
And we led with that because in my mind that is how it is. And I think there was another movie as well with this little boy where he cracks the puzzles. So I mean, I think the other thing I took from that was they highly intelligent, but just in their own rights. Is that how you see that as well?
The DSM-4 was the old diagnostic. Or had the old diagnostic criteria of or putting autism on a spectrum. And on the one side, there was Asperger's syndrome. And I think a lot of people associate Asperger's with these highly intellectual people having an area of absolute amazing cognitive skills. But that has changed now in the DSM-5, and I think that's going to help a lot of people understand autism better. It's or not to put such a big emphasis on those singled out skills that people think children with autism have. A lot of kids have narrowed interests. And some of those narrowed interests could be that they are that they have, I want to say, super abilities in those areas, but that's also an exception. That does not, it's not a given that somebody suffering from autism or being on the autism spectrum will necessarily have a super skill, if we can call it like that, a superpower. They often present with like I said, narrowed interests, and sometimes because they obsess over an interest, That's why we get these super abilities.
I actually really like that you put it that way, Marié, because, autism, from my understanding, is a spectrum of things. It's not a cookie cutter diagnosis. So if for me, if I was to try and explain it in another way, cancer is one thing, but there are very many different types of cancer. And I'm assuming that autism is very similar to that. There are many different types of autism or many different levels of autism. Is that what you... Okay.
Yes, it's basically, it breaks my mind when I try to put it, I want to say, in an academic paragraph or to explain it. There are people that can explain it to you, especially our neurodevelopmental specialists and psychologists. They know a lot more of the what you call it, like the theoretical part of the diagnosis. But when I went to have a look at how the DSM-5 has been changed now, they have split it up, the autism spectrum, they've split it up into three, I just want to see here what they call it, three levels of severity. Pardon. And the three levels of severity are, the first one they call requiring support, and then they have a description of what that means. Level 2 is requiring substantial support, and level 3 is requiring very substantial support. So they have really, I want to say, dumbed it down just to make it more accessible for parents and for everybody involved in working with individuals with autism, just to understand a little bit better of the severity and how it can differ. When they look at the severity, they also look at the severity in different areas. Like you often have your social interaction skills, you've got your speech and language skills, you've got your cognitive abilities, you've got your repetitive behaviors that are often due to your sensory difficulties, that these children have sensory processing difficulties. And the severity on all of those levels assessed and taken together will then put you on one of the 1, 2, or 3 levels of requiring support, or how much support. But then there's also, if you would excuse me just reading this part, preparing for this interview was very interesting for me, because I just had to go dive into some of the academic bits. Should you have a well-established diagnosis of autistic disorder, with marked deficits in social communication but worse symptoms, I'm just going to repeat that. Should you have a well-established diagnosis of autistic disorder, with marked deficits in social communication, but the symptoms do not otherwise meet criteria for the autism spectrum disorder. So that it's mostly social communication. The language is all right. The sensory issues are not that bad. If I say no, not that bad, a professional diagnosing will know the difference. If it's mostly the social communication side, there's something that they now call a social pragmatic communication disorder. And that's, I would say for us, that also falls under autism, but it's also a separate diagnosis. There's no Asperger's anymore. There's now this social pragmatic communication disorder, where you mostly struggle with the social part, but your other skills might not be that badly affected, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And maybe I should have put the disclaimer right at the beginning of the episode. So the reason we're doing this is
Yes.
exactly for the last few minutes is because healthcare practitioners, I mean, you guys have, I know the DSM-4 and the DSM-5, obviously, because of the nature of work we do and because my wife's a, clinical psychologist, but most people don't know this. I think autism, I think Rain Man, and so it's almost like to get your insight on this. And I mean, what you just showed us is how complicated it is. And I love the fact that you said, everyone is their own individual, everyone presents in a different way. And there's no, you can't almost like put a label completely, although you have to give the diagnosis. That's kind of what I heard you saying as well.
Yes,
and
exactly.
The other thing that's interesting is we've had we've had at least an OT on talking about sensory integration, actually 2 so far. And sensory integration disorder, and for us, Shaz and I, and definitely for anyone listening to this, is that has been an eye opener how important that stuff is, because I only learned that probably 8 years ago, and that term. But I think it's been around, like healthcare practitioners know this. So what we're hoping to do is almost like, take the veil off. And so if anyone's listening to this and saying, that sounds about right, what Marie just said, for my little one, maybe I should start looking at it. And if we only get that out of, these episodes, I think that would be amazing, because that's exactly what it is. But curiously, so Shaz and I are big into like superheroes, and most of the superheroes I know have like terrible social skills. So would you classify? And they specialize in certain things,
Yes.
So what causes autism, and would you classify any superhero in that category?
As you said, I think a lot of superheroes might fall into that category. There's not one cause for autism that has been that the people that know have been able to identify. I might be wrong when I say this, but for me there are a lot of influential factors that impact the severity of the autism. But there's definitely coming to light now that there's a neurological base, and there's also this movement that say that if you have autism, it's not necessarily a disability. It might just be a diffability, a different ability, as I think you've hinted now to as well, Oliver. And they call it the neurodiverse line of thinking, that you're just different. You not necessarily have an issue. So there's a neurodiverse versus a neurotypical thinking. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but it is a tricky question. What causes autism? I can't tell you. What I can say is what does not cause autism. And I think hopefully this has been established in the public, that bad parenting does not cause autism. Childhood trauma does not cause autism. And what's the other one? Vaccinations do not cause autism. So that is what does not cause it. But what does cause it is definitely a developmental, a neurodevelopmental difficulty that's lifelong. So what made sense to me is when I did an extra course called Floor Time, DIR Floor Time, which I was thinking of when or where I might bring this in a bit, maybe when we talk about different treatments for autism. But that just highlighted for me how us as individuals have in our development that comes from our neurological, our given neurological skills when we're born, how that transforms us into developing as an adult, all the building blocks that can possibly go wrong, and the wave effect it has upwards. And specifically, as you also mentioned, sensory integration. That is such a big thing that if that goes wrong, it just shakes the whole building. And I think that is one of the big culprits in the difficulties our autistic children experience. Their sensory systems are just wired differently because of their neurological genetics, I want to say. So there's a lot of the sensory integration things that shake everything developing from there.
I'm actually really glad that you said that, because we chatted to an OT a couple of episodes ago who said, on sensory integration, and she was saying, your sensory system is the foundation for everything else. So
yes.
If something's wrong there, it has that knock-on effect all the way up. And,
yes.
Just listening to what you're saying from an autist, from a person who suffers from autism, that, a lot of they might have multiple sensory processes that aren't firing right just because of the way their brain is wired. And I think that's the big thing people need to understand, is that it's the way their brains are wired. It's a like you said, it's a neuro situation. That's why you've now got the new classifications of neurodiverse and neurotypical.
Yes.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that somebody who's neurodiverse is at a disadvantage. It just means that, maybe they're wired slightly differently and are. So I really like that it is the foundation and you've got to build from there. So going along that line, sort of what age can you typically start seeing signs of autism in a child?
They say that there are some red lights that you can start to see even in infants, baby, before 2. And nowadays, diagnosis has started much earlier than when I started to practice. I often get 2-3-year-olds refer to me that somebody in the referral chain has already mentioned the word autism, and the pediatrician is already looking into maybe diagnosing it, just giving the child a few more months or so. So, but I must say, from my perspective, because I don't know, maybe the OT that you guys interviewed might agree with me, because the foundations are still developing in these youngsters, and because there are so many things that influence and so many things that could look different or look odd, that might still be in the process of developing. And because a lot of our neurological disorders like ADHD, a pure sensory processing disorder, or a pure auditory processing disorder, or autism, all of those kind of look the same when the kids are little. And I know there might be people that feel they are confident at diagnosing at such a young age, but to me it seems like there's so much that can still happen. The most important thing is to get a little one to any professional. Just start somewhere so that early intervention can happen, and so that child can be supported into their maximum ability, be it just ADHD or be it whatever superhero they're going to develop into, but that we don't place them in a box when they are so little. A lot of these neurodevelopmental things overlap when the kids are small, and that's just my opinion.
I love the fact that you have that opinion, though, because I've always thought that. But I also like the idea of early development. Our little boy as well. I mean, like, I think we got assistance for him because he struggled with sensory integration, very early on. And I discussed that in another episode, how we found out and stuff like that. But what I really like, but what you said, was I never heard the term neurodiverse, I think, until now, but I heard neurotypical because obviously, but actually, that's a nice way of almost like looking at it now, and saying it's neurotypical and neurodiverse, which is actually really cool. Because, and then coming back to the early diagnosis thing, because I think from that, I mean, and as a parent, I know this because, the schools become a problem, this, and,
Yes.
I think all of those things that you do want to give the child the best chance to be able to like catch up or just see where they are. Because I mean, so many things are happening at that time. But I'm also very grateful for having professionals like yourself around, to help kids. I mean, Shaz spoke about dyslexia in another episode. And when I was growing up, I mean, we had these schools, but, there was a remedial teacher. And every so often he would come and get one child in the class. And we always knew who the child was because that was the
Yeah.
child that was always like lagging behind. So I had this friend of ours, but like, he would always be the last one to copy the stuff from the board, and we would always be looking at him. It's like, why are you taking so long? But when it came to video games, he was like phenomenal. He would like beat us every single time. But that was his superpower. All the way till the trick. And
I think. Sorry, Oliver, if I can just interrupt you, I think that the main thing that one needs to keep in mind is, and the OTs taught me this, is when your diverse skill affects your functioning to a degree that you can't do what's expected of you, or be it that the expectations are not too high. I think then you need some assistance. But all of us are diverse. It's just when your functioning is affected to a serious degree that you need some help.
Okay, now you're really pushing the the envelope in terms of functional versus non-functional. And I find working in corporate, I mean, there were so many non-functional people, but as adults you don't say that. But from a because how do you rate it? Like, so your maths is at a, I don't know, what, like a 4 out of 10. But yeah, it's interesting that you say that. Obviously, I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but yeah, it's interesting how you say that. I like that as well. I mean, it's something because certain people, I mean, would shy away from having conversations all the time. I mean, I'm sure as a speech therapist, you find this. The one OT that dealt in a pediatric setting, she said, like kids take a while to warm up. Although they have such cool toys in their rooms, the kids take a while to warm up to them, before they can actually do the proper, what they deem as therapy. And it's a trust thing. So it goes with your thought of, everyone is different and everyone is, everyone is an individual, and you kind of have to see what level it is. But just to go a little bit in terms of the functional stuff. So if a child is keeping pace with their schoolwork, the teachers are happy, and they're rating them from an academic sense, and from a social setting, they're doing. Is that how you would view functional?
Yes. Just like a silly example, if somebody I'm now just thinking of, okay, so if I'm trying to think of a plain example, but okay, no, we can cut that part. Yes, if it, like, as an adult, your job is whatever your profession is, what you've chosen to do. So you need to be able to do that to be functional. You might not be able to socialize with colleagues, but if you are not in a HR position, then you don't have to be able to do that. So for kids, their job is, when they are little, to play and to develop and to be safe to themselves, like not to be a danger to themselves, and to grow, to be able to eat, to take in nutrition. If any of those things are hampering their full potential, I would say that's when something is not functional. And once they start going to school, if they can't keep up with the academics, as you said, that would be a red light. Then they might go to, we've got so many lovely schools out there that who have different expectations, or they just tweak it a little bit, or the amount of time or the way that the child is expected to do something is just tweaked a little bit from, for example, mainstream. And if the child can then function and do it, I mean, then they are functional. But if still not, yeah, I think then they're not functional, obviously, in reaching their academic potential. And that's where we come in. We need to try and assist the little ones in their development, and the older ones with alternative or different ways of getting to as far as they can get academically, becoming a successful as possible adult, becoming as independent as possible. And I think from the speech therapy perspective, we would look at a child's social interaction part, social communication. We would look at pronunciation-wise, if a child can form the sounds, or if there's some kind of a motor developmental issue with the mouth, if the child's language is sufficient to understand class or lectures or lessons, and to be able to answer it, do orals or verbal reasoning or things like that. But then also it comes to putting it onto paper. If we take a few steps back, we look at their early literacy skills, because your early literacy comes from well-developed auditory processing. So your hearing of a word and hearing of the tiny parts the word consists of, like fall consists of a or can you hear that? And then they need to be able to put it onto paper, and then eventually they need to translate their language onto paper for answering questions and things like that. Pardon the geese going overhead. So yeah, that's where we would help to assist the child be functional in their development and in their academic skills.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think, yeah. And sorry, I know Shez has a question just now, but if I just ask, so how would a speech therapist normally help a child that has been diagnosed, or even if there's an inkling of autism? How would you normally help that type of child?
I've learned that it is extremely important to have your multidisciplinary team in place, because as a speech therapist, we are not really trained in sensory integration, in planning or sequencing, which I'll explain just now why that is so important, the development of motor planning and sequencing. So to have your team in place is very important, so that I can get feedback from them with regards to what does this child's sensory system look like. The sensory system is where we need to start, because if a child is not regulated, or we also say calm and ready for interaction, ready for learning, the opposite is going to be true. The child's going to be in a fight or flight or freeze state. And in that state, you can't learn. That's your basic, I want to say, when we were still living in nature and the lion approached you, that flight, fight, or freeze state is not conducive for learning. So we need the sensory input to know where this child is at. And luckily, there are ways that you can use sensory input to calm other senses. And I need to know what helps a child to focus. Do I need to talk slower? Do I need to vary my pitch? Do I need to not talk at all because the child is auditory sensitive? Yes, sometimes in speech therapy, we don't talk at all. Do I need to then, in that instance, maybe use more visual, like use signs, like Makaton signing? Or do I need to use a picture system to communicate with this child? Gestures, facial expression, body language, how much of those visual components of interaction am I going to need to interact with this child in order to, or maybe another thing, so the auditory part, knowing how to use my voice or not, the visual part, how much visual I need to incorporate, and then also the movement part, how much movement does this child need or not need to be able to be regulated and to now be in a place where they can learn. And that's where we then start. When they are in a place that they can learn, we call it, the first step is to be able to share attention, to be able to take you into their world, because that's where we start. They are not able, often children with autism are not able to see your perspective. They don't have the theory of mind to know what another person is thinking, reasoning, might react, might want, and even not what is that person, what is that person's idea, like why are they doing this gesture, or why are they looking at me, or why are they turning away from me, or why are they taking this toy away from me. They don't understand the other person's intentions. And I think if you think about that, not knowing the intentions of people around you can be a very stressful place to be, because you can't predict what's going to happen, and you just stay in your own bubble. You just stay here because you know your own intentions, you know what you like to do, you know what makes you feel better sensory wise. So that's often where we see these kids being in a bubble and not coming out of that. And that's the first step to interaction and communication development, is how can we get that child to come out of that bubble. So they need to be regulated sensory wise. And then I need to be able to assist this child to do shared attention. Once we've got shared attention, you want to teach the child to do back and forth things, like I roll a ball to you, now your job is to roll it back to me. That's what I'm expecting. And then I will roll it back to you, and then you will roll it back to me. Or if you run away, you know that I'm supposed to now know to chase you. And then I will chase you, and then you know that you need to hide, because then I'm not going to find you. Okay, so when I find you, what are you supposed to do then? Then you're supposed to go boo or something. Mm-hmm. Those predictable type of play routines are the next thing that that I would focus on to establish in a child with autism. This is a quite severe level of autism. Let's say that it's a child that's nonverbal and very much in their own world. And a very important part is then, once I've been able to place what this child needs to come out of their bubble, and what causes them to go back into the bubble, you need to try and educate the parent and the other caregivers involved with the child. They often already know better than us, because as a parent, you know your child. But then to come into a trust relationship with the person that will be in interaction with this child most of the day, on how to do this back and forth, so that this child can start to practice that and become confident in that. Our kids with autism have very limited confidence in interaction because they have very limited success with that. They might bite to communicate, or they might push to communicate, and that's not going to be successful. They're going to get the opposite reaction, or they might not be able to look at you, but they might just do a funny physical movement to show you that they are interested in what you're doing, but we overlook that because it's not effective. So we need to become inspectors and investigators of the little things that they do to try and get our attention, so that we can help them become confident and get out of their bubbles more often. And I haven't even touched on then language development, because that comes way, way, way later. I think a lot of the challenges that the biggest challenge that I experience working with children with autism is when parents come to me with the desperate need that the child needs to talk, and the child needs to tell them what they want using words. And that is, I want to say, sometimes years from where we are. We can expect that years from now, because there are so many other things that are not in place before you are going to get words. So that is a big challenge in working with children with autism as a speech and language therapist. We can't demand words. It's a natural process of interaction development.
Have you ever found parents actually saying something like that? We bring the child to a speech and language therapist, but the child is not even speaking as yet.
Yes, and I often lose patients that way. But I think that's a general thing that speech therapists struggle with. As I want to say, typically developing human beings, we mostly rely on verbal communication, and we rely on it to express our needs, but we also rely on it for to understand other people's needs. And often, if somebody cannot relate verbally, then we push them out, or because we become awkward, we don't know what else or how else to get this relationship going. And there are so many other ways that assist verbal language that we need to focus on more if somebody struggles with verbal language. We can't just expect someone to join our world with that. But I can also, as a parent, and feeling all the pressures of just time management and work versus parenthood and just having a life. Verbal is your easiest way of communication, so that would be the ideal. But I think a big challenge of working with the parents and the caregivers of children with autism is to take a step back and not have verbal outcome as your number one outcome, because there are techniques and there are strategies that get verbal responses from children, but it's often parroting, and it's not natural and it's not original. So you are creating a little robot that says what you wanted to say, when you wanted to say it, how you want to say it, but it doesn't come from inside. So it's not really the child's personality that you're developing, their likes, their wants, and you get along the road, you get behavior and frustration and a lot of negative things that come out if you don't follow the correct sequence of development.
Really love that you've put it that way, that, even if you've got a non-verbal autistic child, that it's a journey. There's so many building blocks that you need to put in place before you start talking. And, you do have to look at cues and stuff, but it's amazing to hear from a speech therapist's point of view that, yes, getting the child to communicate verbally is the end goal, but, there are a lot of milestones to get through before then. So typically with a non-verbal child, how long would you say that they would typically be in therapy for before you actually start getting to that? Okay, they're starting to, even is one or two words, they're not still not talk, but at least they're starting to be able to talk.
Your speech and your language is a product of being able to visualize, to visualize the physical world. I want to say in your imagination, or in a figurative way. So we take it for granted, but to be able to know the word for bus, for example, you need to have seen a bus, understand what it does, what it sounds like, the characteristics of it, and then you need to be able to form that picture in your head of a bus without the bus being there, and then link the word to it, bus. Because if I can explain it like this, in a different language, the word bus will not make sense to me, because I haven't encoded those figurative sounds that form the word to connect it with meaning. The meaning is the picture that you're able to form in your mind, and then your language just adds some sounds to that. So you need to be able to do a lot of basic things before you can form the picture in your head, before you can actually start to express the word. And often with children that have developmental problems, you see, I can't remember now what they call it, but they've got differing levels of skills. They might have strong points in their visual skills and weaknesses in their auditory processing, and strong points in their gross motor, so they don't develop fluently. Some skills are much stronger than other skills, and some of those strong skills might assist them in forming ideas already, but it's not a complete picture. So you sometimes see children having single words, and they start with some bits of language, or they might even have the stereotypical phrases that they use, that they see on television, or that they hear over and over, and they are able to express that. Apart from or different from typical speech development that start by babbling, ba 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 ma ma da ba da ba da. These children might just start with a word or even a phrase, a complete phrase, and that can be at any age. It can be very random, mostly because of the randomness of their developmental skills, some strong points and some weaknesses. So I hope I answer your question, Shaz, that it is, once again, as different as the different children that I see. But once that a child starts to be able to visualize and form ideas in their head, the language usually starts coming. Before that, you might see some stereotypical phrases like, I want that, or no more, or something falls and they might go, uh-oh, which is a learned type of phrase. It's not necessarily their own idea, but they've learned it and they apply it in a correct or in an incorrect context. But that is not, I want to say, not pure language development happening there. Your pure language development happens once a child is able to start to conceptualize and visualize things in their head. And just to maybe make it more practical, that often follows when they start to play symbolically, when they start to play baby, and giving the baby food and putting the baby to bed, and because they're starting to visualize things that happen in everyday that they see mommy do, that they see daddy do, go to work, come back, get in the car, go to the park, come back. And when they play that out, it's because they're starting to visualize real happenings, and then they're able to conceptualize it, and often then the language starts coming with that. So it's more of a where are they in the development of conceptualizing things and then the language comes, than at what age are they before the language comes, if that makes sense.
It shows you how complicated that stuff is, eh? I mean, so when you said, I can't stop thinking Teletubbies, but yeah, so our little ones watched a lot of those things. Does it actually help? Like Peppa Pig, at one stage, I mean, she watched so much of CBBS that she was actually sounding British. I mean, so everyone's like, where does she go to school? It's like, CBBS actually.
That's it. I'm very glad you asked that, Oliver, because it's a question a lot of parents ask us. But my child, because we are very against like screen time, and we are promoting like rather play creatively. When are parents going to play creatively in your daily life? When do you have time for that? But as far as possible, we try to promote as little as possible screen time. But then parents come and say, yes, but it's academic type of programs that they watch, and my child can count, and my child is 2, but they know the whole alphabet, and they know a hexagon, and they know one must be very careful. There's definitely a place for screen time and for academic programs. But our kiddos that struggle to this is now where the occupational therapy comes in, who struggle to organize themselves and to sequence their play. That's maybe the easiest place where you will see it. To sequence playing, daddy goes to work, daddy comes back, daddy or the car fills up with petrol and then goes to work and then comes back. Those type of play sequences. Or a child that struggles to play hide and seek because they struggle with the sequence of what do I need to do, what do you need to do. And I mean, that's our autistic children. They take a wheel and they spin the wheel because that makes sense to them. There's no sequence to that. There's no creativity to that. There's no expansion on that. If they don't have that sequencing with their body and with their motor actions, and with their conceptualizing, they take a shortcut by getting the experience from the screen, because the screen gives them the sequencing and they don't have to do it by themselves. They just get fed the sequences and they get fed these visual inputs, and that's why it's easier for them to learn that. But their whole body hasn't experienced that, so they're not able to make sense of the concepts. It's just the concept. The alphabet is just the alphabet. They don't realize that it's for reading and for writing, etc. The shapes on there are just shapes. They don't realize that you can play with it. You can put it into other shapes. You can build different shapes. You can build a diamond from 4 squares, or if you understand what I'm getting to, the physical experience is always better for a child, especially for forming those concepts symbolically in their head, than just being fed from a 2-dimensional screen. What also happens with screen time is the children's level of auditory development is not where their development of their visual skills are. They're often ahead with their visual processing. So the screen will give all this lovely visual input, but at an auditory level, they have a mismatch because they cannot follow the songs and the sounds and the things at the same pace as the visual input. So you get a mismatch between audio and visual, and you get a what do you call it? like a sensory mismatch that causes a dysregulation. And it's often then that you get the aggressive behavior or the emotional behavior when the television is taken away. It's because of that mismatch. Yeah. So that's just my take on the screen time and why it's important for the little ones to do things physically rather than seeing it.
So we used to drive the probably the speech therapist and the teachers crazy because like so when those programs come on, they say A, B, C, D, and obviously the teacher wants to say so so when Tristan would go and they would point to B and he's like B, and it's like, no, it can't be like that because you're trying to form the words. And I get you. I mean, that's completely true. And I think as parents, I mean, it's such a cool pacifier, just to put the screen in front of them and think you're doing good. The other trend, this is probably not on topic, but is based on what you just said now. I noticed like our kids, they would watch on YouTube, again, coming back to video games, they would watch people play Minecraft rather than playing Minecraft. And as someone that doesn't do that, like, in my mind, it just doesn't make any sense. But it kind of, like what you're saying, and I don't know if it's a generational thing now. It's just so much easier watching someone else play the video game. We're at that level, it seems, rather than doing the work of actually doing, like you said, the sequencing and, putting the diamonds together or whatever it is. It's so much more easier when, like the Teletubbies just did it. It just magically just happened rather than
and
actually
the thing
doing
is,
the work.
you still get, sorry, Oliver, but I think the thing is you still get the satisfaction. Seeing somebody do it and doing it yourself, you still get the same amount of satisfaction with half of the work. So I think that's the scary part. And that's why it's so, I want to say addictive, but yeah, you still get the reward, even though you didn't do the work.
Yeah, no, agreed. So I was asking Shaz earlier because she's playing this video game and she's been playing it for like months now. Did you finish it? But it's that tenacity of like just finishing it, and that experience, around it. And I find, generationally, it seems to be, more instant gratification. And I think it probably drives, therapists like yourself crazy because, you do want them to work through that stuff. And I think, you have such short bursts with the kids as well. I'm not sure what's your typical, sessions look like it, but probably 2 or 3 sessions would be, ideal. But I'm not sure if you even get up to that, maybe one session for 30-minute or 45-minute session, and you're trying to, try to get these skills into kids, which must be a real challenge. But
I must say, on the pro side for screen time, we've tended to follow the saying of if you can't beat them, join them. So, so we've started to, if I say now we, a colleague of mine and myself, have started to try and use these like Little Baby Bum and the little stories that form a little sequence, like going on a lion hunt, where you go through the grass and squish in the mud and into the cave. You can use that for a child that struggles with planning, because now, okay, you give them the plan. They know this plan of the song, and it's something familiar, and especially our autistic kiddies love familiar things. So if you can now make that familiar happening into something physical, so I've got my grass and I've got my muddy puddle and I've got my cave drawn on the whiteboard, and then they understand where I'm at. So you immediately get that joined attention. If you can get the screen away, and no meltdown if you put the screen down, but you can get them to play with you and actually physically make it part of make it an experience for them. That's how we've started to use screen and technology to try and help these children. And I think we haven't done it long enough, but I've seen some success with it. But we definitely need to think of more ways to use it rather than to just fight the opposite battle of no technology. No, we're never going to win.
Yeah, I agree with you because I don't think it's going away, and, it's the new normal, which is interesting. I just thought of it now, but, like with athletes, they say you almost need to visualize it. So, what you're saying, you play the screen time so they know the sequencing and then now they do the activity. And you need to almost marry those two,
Yes.
like thinking styles or ways to do it in order to be better. And maybe so it'll be interesting hearing you in a few months saying, it's actually working better or something like that. But specifically speaking about autism, what I thought, you were saying some time back, about that regular pattern that they need, and that fight to flight, and that that safe space. So do you find, because I just think, again, you can almost like provide the safe space at home, and then you provide the safe space in the therapy room, but now you go to a restaurant. How do you provide that safe space? Do you find there's anything around that, specifically around how do you make it safe, or how do you make it so that the child thinks it's safe? Is there anything around that?
I think you need to, as a parent, know your child. And just going back, we always go back to the regulation and the sensory profile that this child will have. So if it's a child that is auditory sensitive, it could be something as easy as to get them those earphones that just muffle out the sound a little bit, to help them when they need to go with you to a restaurant or need to go with you for shopping. So yeah, that's an easy option. If it's something like movement and things that might dysregulate a child, it's going to be a bit harder. But I know a colleague of mine used to put her daughter inside a trolley with her toys and covered it up with a blanket, and then they went shopping, and she was happy in there playing with her toys, not seeing everything. She was fine hearing the hustle and bustle, but not seeing everything. She was very much regulated, but she also knew my child can tolerate this for half an hour, and then it's suicide if I stay longer. So I think we don't want to change our lives completely to adapt to our children, but we also need to know our children and how their little sensory systems work. We actually need to start with ourselves and know how our sensory system works, because self-knowledge is a big thing when it comes to your sensory things. I need to tell my daughter, who loves screaming and yelling and throwing things, that when mommy says whoa, because I can feel myself working up. And when I say whoa, she needs to whoa, or otherwise I'm going to go to my room and she's going to have to play by herself because I need to calm down. So I try to teach her, when I get there, I need to go calm down. When you get there, you need to go calm down. But if you push mommy past that, like has happened in the past, I'm going to flip out and it's not going to be fun for anybody. So I had to learn that auditory is my trigger. When she screams and yells and things, it's like this, and I snap. And then I can't go back again. Then I'm in fight or flight. So to know yourself and to know your child. A restaurant is a tricky thing. And you want to be able to have a normal life and go out and take your child with you. But sometimes I think if the child's sensory system is not going to allow it, rather to have like a babysitting option where there's somebody that your child's familiar with and that they can stay at home while you just have your going out experience, instead of forcing your child to try and cope, because they especially children on the autism spectrum, they don't have coping mechanisms. You need to be their coping mechanism. You need to identify what the trigger is and when the trigger is going to happen, and how you can try and prevent that. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does.
It will be
very much so.
Yeah. Okay.
But you were saying it would be?
No, I want to say it would be brave to take a child out into a restaurant. I have parents that take the kids to bounce a lot, or what's that we've got some children play areas that are only trampolines and ball pits and like these massive jump around stations that they can have birthdays and things. So I have a mommy that's brave and that takes her severely autistic boy with the others when they go. But she, for example, puts on his T-shirt that says, "I am autistic. Sometimes I behave funny," or whatever his thing is, and just bring me to my mom or whatever. So that if he's not with her and something happens and he has a meltdown, that the people around him will know this is not just a crazy child that's misbehaving, that they will just take him back to his mom. And in that way, she also just has a bit of a time out. She can go sit on the bench and check her WhatsApps and yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that reminds me. I mean, I don't know if it's still around because we haven't been for some time. But there was a place in Johannesburg called Orangotangos, and it was similar to that. You know, it's obviously like lots of ball pits, lots of slides, and they had a place for where the parents could have like toasted zombies or coffee, and the kids just play, and it worked really well. I think we haven't done that for a while, but that actually makes a lot of sense. And Marié, tell me. Obviously you deal with children, but would those children with the right assistance, would they be able to live a normal life at some point? And this might be an unfair question because I'm not sure if you track that through, their to their life or into adulthood. But is that something that you would see?
I think it will be very important to have all the assistance possible when they are young, but it definitely depends on the level of autism and the level of support they need. But I want to say a child that receives as much input as possible, their level of assistance will change and they will become more independent. The important thing is that they learn to regulate themselves, if that is possible for them. And that's why they're going to need assistance for longer than a typically developing toddler. They're going to need assistance for a longer period. And often when you see that self-regulation kick in, that usually starts to happen around, I might stand to be corrected, around 6 for a typically developing child, where they start to be able to know how to regulate themselves more successfully. This could happen for an autistic child when they are 10, 11, 18, 25, but when that self-regulation kicks in and they can handle themselves better, I would say their life can change into a much more normal normal type of life where they can be more independent and they don't need that much assistance anymore. But as I said, it will differ for each and every individual with autism. There are a lot of adults that suffer from autism or that's on the autism spectrum, like Temple Grandin, like I can't remember the other boy's name now, but it's lovely to go and watch their programs and to go and watch their just their experience of what the journey of their life has been, and their lives are different, but they are still mostly independent and they have a self-fulfilled life. They feel that they mean something, and I think for every individual that's the important part, that you feel you can come to your right and what you would like to achieve daily is possible for you, whatever it might be.
Yeah, and I mean, so I look at the entrepreneur stories, obviously, because that's part of our journey. But like if you look at Steve Jobs, Richard Branson, I mean, they self-confessed, they didn't quite fit in 100%. and which is actually interesting because I mean, even the question, what is really a, we're getting philosophical, but what is a self-fulfilled life, or fulfilled
Yes.
life? I mean, there's so many variations around that stuff. But I think, we covered the topic really well. I think from I liked what you said. I didn't ignore it, but, when you said about parents' coping skills as well. I mean, you know what, that's the one thing we're finding with this whole, doing the episodes, because I think it's one thing, assisting the kids and stuff like that. But I think parents also need like their own, we probably need a few episodes on, practitioners helping, like parents cope with the whole thing, because I think that's probably another angle. We say it jokingly, but it's actually reality. How do you do that? Because I think Cher said it in another episode, but when you're a child, they tell you go take a time out. And it's interesting that you said that now, but you go into your wardrobe, you just like sit there, complete, isolation, and then you're cool. But if you try to do that in a work situation, there's no way you're getting any promotion. It's like not going to happen. It's just, that's the end of your career kind of growth perspective. But
and sadly, I think every corporate institution should have a sensory room or a timeout room or a
yeah, if we ever get the people on Google on the show, probably we can ask them, because they're probably the most liberal with these things. But I've never seen it in all of my working experience, and I do want to say, being on the management side of it, although you want to be inclusive, I don't think you're going to trust someone that's going to take a time out on a customer site. It's just not, because the customer is not going to understand that too. But all good. So is there anything, we'll ask for closing thoughts. You did warn us, I think, with speech therapists, obviously we have to book more time because, we covered the topic so well, I think, which was amazing. But is there, we'll ask Shaz for her closing thoughts now. But is there anything on your side, Marié, that you thought we should have asked, but we didn't, in terms of autism with children?
I think that parents with children with autism, they need to use what they have around them and people that are around them. They mustn't try to do it by themselves, because they probably know this, but it's a journey. It's a long journey, and you are going to get discouraged along the way. But your support system is very, very important, because if you don't fill your cup, you're not going to be able to help your child. I have the utmost respect for parents of children that have any kind of tricky thing going or any difficulty. I would just really, really find people around you that are not going to frown at you when you just cry for a random reason, and stick with them, and keep your support system around you. And I think the other thing is, don't feel guilty if you can't provide every type of therapy your child needs, because everything costs money, and it gets crazy. Everything that's available out there. Just love your child, know yourself, and try to know your child, and try to just support them as far as you can with love and comfort. That sounds very philosophical, but that's really just what it comes down to.
Yeah, I was trying, when you said fill your cup, I was trying to figure out who told me that. But I mean, those are really cool words. I love that. I've heard that before. But I also think, hopefully we get to this level, because, what you said is actually so important as well, is that as parents, you don't know what to do, and I think, the healthcare practitioners do. And we had an OT some time ago. We started working with her to almost come up with these, activities like that are related to sensory. And it was simple things, like blow bubbles into the water, does something for the sensory system, and it would be nice to put a pack together for parents that they could do it when they could, that you don't necessarily have to go through to therapy. Obviously, that's the bonus, and that's what you should strive for. But I think you're the first practitioner so far that we've had on board that have said it in that way, which I really, really appreciate. It's about, but I would go one step further, and hopefully we get to this level where, we can come up with activities with practitioners that almost parents can subscribe to, and then come back to like a feedback session and say, how did those activities, how did you do with it? What did you struggle with? Maybe the bubbles was too much, maybe, we tried a different straw, something like that. I think would be almost the next evolution of how you almost make therapy much more inclusive in terms of daily life. Because,
Yes.
I mean, this is more my opinion, but I think we're living in a world where, there's so many factors that are happening around us. Screen time, which we spoke about, jokingly, but that stuff is a reality. It's not going away. The fact that my kids prefer to watch gamers play video games rather than play video games is, it's a changing world, and I think how we try to address that would be interesting. But that's just my thoughts on it. Shaz, on your side? Anything else?
Actually going to say something very sorry, I was going to say something very similar along those lines. If you go back before cell phones, before the internet, before tablets, when you got the news at 7 p.m., that's when the news came on the TV. Or, you had your landline. So unless somebody phoned you at home, I think now everything's so accessible. There is so much, just people are just being bombarded from every different direction with things. So, I can understand where it becomes a lot harder for kiddies to kind of regulate their sensory, so because we're living in a world where you're bombarded from every direction. So, yeah, if parents can also kind of find a way, like you say, if you can't afford therapy, just love your child and learn to understand them and see what you can do to help. But if there is stuff out there that is available for parents to be able to see, we were speaking to somebody a while back, this child loves tunnels, but to go and buy an occupational therapy tunnel costs a fortune. And the therapist said, but you've got a dining room table and chairs. Just put a blanket over the chairs. You've got a tunnel. Yes. But, unless you've got some way of letting parents know that that would work, I think it is a big move to start saying, firstly, let's break the stigma around autism. It's not necessarily Rain Man, but also to kind of start giving tools to the parents to say, this is how you can actually continue therapy at home. We heard a really great saying the other day, which was a sensory diet.
Yes.
And to be able to say to parents, okay, so this is where your child is. This is kind of what you need to be able to give them at home that you can actually do. Because I think sometimes, especially with an autistic child or a child with any developmental delay or so on, parents also feel lost because they don't know what to do. So, that I think for me is a big thing. I remember when I was little, my mom would come home and, you immediately want to tell mommy everything that happened in the day. And eventually we learned, mom comes home, wait 10 minutes, let her have a cup of coffee, and then you can talk to her, because she needed that time to wipe off the day and now deal with being a single mom to 2 kids at that time. Yeah. So, yeah.
I think you said that nicely, Shaz. So on our side, Marie, thank you very much. This was amazing. It reinforces that idea of why we're doing this stuff. But I love the conversation. I love the topic. And we're going to include your details in the show notes. So if anyone's looking to set up a session with you or speak about this in more detail, hopefully they can find that. And maybe there's other resources as well that you can point them to. But thank you very much for doing this.
Definitely. Other resources. I'm also trying to, as you guys say, to sift through everything that's out there and find things that are effective and applicable that one can give to parents. Myself and my colleagues are building up some lists and databases, so we can definitely point parents to some resources so that I don't have to do all the sifting. But thank you so much for having me. This was amazing. And I think what you guys do is amazing. This is a very good initiative.
Thanks for saying that. And on our side, as I said, we loved it.
Yeah.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening. As always, stay tuned and we'll speak to you in the next episode.